we don't know exactly what the direct mechanism or mechanisms are. We suspect that low-frequency and infrasound waves are part of the problem, and we've got a number of reasons for suspecting that, but there may well be others. The biggest single problem that people describe is chronic severe sleep deprivation. And when I first started interviewing people or listening to people's stories, I thought it was the audible noise from the turbines. There's no doubt that they can sound very noisy, and particularly at night. So I thought that that was the main part of the problem. But in fact, I now think that it's this phenomena of people waking up in the middle of the night in a very panicked, alarmed state, where they don't know what's woken them. They often can't hear the turbines, and they cannot get back to sleep for quite some time. And sometimes this happens on many occasions during the night. So the sleep deprivation is a big one, and I think that in its own way has some pretty severe consequences. We know there's well-established literature in medical journals and lots of studies that have shown that chronic severe sleep deprivation has long-term serious sequelae. And these turbines, when they're installed, are around for a long time. So what we're saying is that we need to get the siting right, and we need to do the science first so that we know what a safe distance is, because at the moment we really don't. That basic science hasn't been done. So chronic severe sleep deprivation, there's a range of other symptoms which Dr. Nina Pierpont has described as wind turbine syndrome. She did a study that involved people from around the world a number of years ago and published it in a book. Certainly my findings from interviewing people in Australia absolutely correlated her findings. I didn't do it as any part of a formal study. Started out on this originally because I wanted to know whether or not wind turbines were in fact a problem. Turbines were proposed for the hills near my home, and I've got a young family. And with my medical training, I was sceptical, I must admit, to start with. Didn't think that there were, that there were any problems. I had no idea a year ago. But certainly now, after talking to so many people in Australia and some internationally, I'm now absolutely convinced that there is a very real problem. And we need to find out what a safe distance is. And what we're saying as part of our submission to the Senate is that if you're going to build them, and they may well be a very important part of the renewable energy landscape, please make sure we put them further than 10 kilometres away from people's homes, because that's the limit of where people are finding that they're getting symptoms, particularly some of the nighttime waking. And then when we've done the science, we will be able to better position them so that they're not going to adversely impact on people's lives. What's happening is that some families are actually being driven out of their homes. I know a number of families where they're actually homeless and surviving on the charity of friends and relatives. And I think this is very much an unintended consequence, but it's something that is happening, and we need to investigate why.
Dr. Laurie, how close are these wind turbines being built to people's homes currently? I said you mentioned the 10 kilometres, but surely at the moment they're quite a lot closer than that. Do you know the distance at the minute?
Look, it varies. I'm hearing that in Western Australia, I think there's a 500-metre setback. In Victoria, the new Liberal government has brought in a 2-kilometre setback, subject to certain negotiations, I understand. So, look, it varies, but I guess our issue is that none of that is actually based on any credible science, because the science has not yet been done, particularly with measuring how far the infrasound and low-frequency sound waves travel, and whether, in fact, they are the culprit, which is actually making people sick. So what we want to do is actually start collecting data in people's homes where they're finding that they're getting these symptoms. Some are farmers and they're getting them out in the paddock, but I guess in people's homes at night is an easier place to study, and actually set up some monitoring, do some proper independent 24-hour ambulatory blood pressure monitoring in people's homes, sleep studies, infrasound monitoring. All of this is possible. The study researchers are ready and waiting. The subjects are ready and waiting. What we need is actually the political will to do it, and some money.
Have these tests been undertaken, or similar tests been undertaken overseas?
No, which I found extraordinary. When I first started getting into this, I thought, this problem, turbines have been around for a very long time. Why hasn't this work been done if there really is a problem? And that stopped me from believing that there was a problem, because I just couldn't believe that the work hadn't been done. There has been some work done, but it's all been done funded by individual concerned clinicians. Dr. Amanda Harry, who was a UK general practitioner in Cornwall, who first rang the alarm bells back in 2003, 2004. Our own Dr. David Isa from Tura Foster in Victoria, after the Tura wind development started operating, and his patients started becoming unwell with exactly the same symptoms. There's a couple of American doctors, Dr. Nina Pierpont, who I've mentioned, Dr. Michael Nissenbaum, who's recently presented at the International Wind Turbine Noise Conference in Rome, and I heard him in Ontario, and he's produced a paper which I understand is about to be published in a peer-reviewed journal, which confirms that there are serious health problems. There are doctors around. Professor Bob McMurtry is another one from Ontario, who set up the Society for Wind Vigilance, which is the Canadian equivalent of the Waubra Foundation, again trying to push for independent health studies into these serious issues. In Ontario, they have a mandated setback of, I think it's 550 metres, and there's a lot of people in Ontario that I'm aware of who are getting very unwell and being driven out of their homes. Same thing. And so there's been a reluctance, I think, on the part of governments around the world to accept that there is, in fact, a very real problem.
Now, predictably, the energy industry, through their lobby group, Clean Energy Council of Australia, have come out and denied any links between the reported complaints and wind turbines. How much pressure do they have to bear on government, in your opinion?
Look, I think they've had, I think they have had a big influence, and I guess the issue is that, their claim is that there is currently no peer-reviewed published scientific evidence, and whilst that's true in the published medical journals, there is increasing concern that there is in fact an issue. There are many credible reports of, observed clinical situations where people are becoming unwell, and all those doctors who have reported this have been ignored all around the world. And so there's a gap between what the clinicians are saying and what the wind industry is saying, what the lobby groups are saying, what the wind developers are actually saying. Interestingly, the NH and MRC are becoming increasingly concerned about the situation. They're convening a workshop on the 7th of June in Canberra, and they're re-looking at this issue. In their report, they've been widely quoted as saying that there are no direct pathological effects from wind turbines, but they also do advocate taking a precautionary approach, and they can see that in fact this is not happening. And I guess, we don't know what a precautionary approach is in terms of a setback distance or a sound pressure level, because those studies haven't been done, particularly on infrasound, and that's why the studies need to do their thing, find the results, and then they can properly inform the planning guidelines, and then a precautionary approach can be adopted. But until the science is done, we really don't know.
Now, given the amount of money invested in these wind turbine projects, it would be fair to say that the wind farm owners aren't about to pack up and leave, although you did mention that some were made homeless and surviving on goodwill and charity.
The neighbours of the people who I'm talking about, who I've become aware of, are people who don't actually have turbines on their land. The turbines are on the land adjoining them. But the acoustic pollution from these turbines goes over fences, of course, and the sound waves can travel for miles. I mean, the acousticians who are independent of the industry who I work with say they can certainly, they can travel 10 kilometres and more under certain weather conditions. And so, I mean, I happen to know from the family members of people who are hosting turbines that they too are getting unwell, but there's all sorts of reasons, I think, why that story isn't getting out. And I think, they deserve the appropriate clinical care and concern as much as anyone else. I think there's been far too much secrecy and a disinclination to believe the stories of these people who are genuinely becoming unwell through no fault of their own. Many of these people didn't oppose the turbines coming into their coming into the area. Some of them welcomed them. Some of them actually have worked on the turbines and have become unwell. So there's been a lot of nasty victim blaming that has gone on, accusing people of being either NIMBYs, liars, nutters, or jealous because they're not getting the turbine, they're not getting the money from the turbines. Whereas in my experience, what's happening is that they're actually getting sick. And some of them are elderly and frail, some of them are young. Some of them can't, young as in children. Some of them are not able to sell their properties, and so they're effectively trapped, or they just cannot stay any longer because they get too unwell. And they, in fact, there's one person I've been told has been advised by his doctor that he really can't go home, and he's living in a caravan on a friend's block a certain distance away. That's one in South Australia that I'm aware of at Waterloo. So with the planned implementation of more and more turbines, the cumulative effect of this is going to affect many, many more people. And that's why I'm saying, look, the alarm bells are ringing now. Let's stop, take a look at what's going on and proceed with caution on the basis of good, credible, independent science.
Well, so is compensation for these people that are affected the only short-term solution?
I'm sorry, I missed that bit.
Is compensation for these people that have been affected the only short-term solution, or are you proposing something else?
Look, we're not proposing anything as far as that goes. I think we need to find out what the problems are first, and then there will need to be some sort of resolution to the intractable situation that these people find themselves in. I mean, the towers are, very expensive to erect, and they're big structures and significant investments have been made. But at the same time, people's lives are being, they are literally being shattered. And so there needs to be some sort of negotiation to resolve that very, very difficult situation. I have every sympathy for the farmers who've signed up contracts with the developers on the assumption that the wind developer and Clean Energy Council's claims of no adverse health effects are true. But then, I've heard some of them saying that, they're very, very sorry about what's actually happened to their community, which has been divided, and to their neighbours who have been made very unwell. So, there needs to be some honesty about what's going on, some proper science, and then I think, you've got to sit down at the table and try and work out some solution to a very difficult situation.
Waubra's Medical Director, Dr. Sarah Laurie, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
That's a pleasure, Jess. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Dr. Sarah Laurie there talking to us about wind farms.